Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Joey Reyes, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm the executive assistant and one of the line producers here at Long Wharf Theater. And before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to recognize that Long Wharf Theater sits on the unceded territory of the Pogoset, Quinnipiac, and Wappinger peoples. As we begin today, we acknowledge that Indigenous peoples and nations have for generations stewarded the lands and waterways of what we now call the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations and this land. We remind ourselves that along with stolen land came stolen people. It is our responsibility to the future to know our past. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. The Lab is a free public event on the second Friday of each month made possible by the support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. These events are curated by local and national artists who are in residency at Long Wharf Theater for a month prior to the event. The subjects that are explored in the lab are as dynamic as the artists who host them. This month, our resident artist is Donja R. Love. Donja is a Philly native whose work examines the forced absurdity of life for those who identify as Black, queer, and HIV positive. A diverse intersection filled with eloquent stories that challenge the white supremacist heteronormative structures that exist in American culture. He's the recipient of the Antonio's inaugural Langston Hughes Award, the Helen Merrill Award, the Lawrence Hatcher Award, and the Princess Grace Playwriting Award. Other honors include the Larks Van Leer New Voices Fellowship, the Playwright Realms Writing Fellowship, and the Philadelphia Adult Grand Slam Poetry Champion. He's the co-founder of the Each Other Project, an organization that helps build a community and provide visibility through art and advocacy for LGBTQ+ people of color. Plays include 1 and 2 at the New Group, Fireflies at the Atlantic Theater Company, Sugar in Our Wounds at Manhattan Theater Club, and The Trade. He's a graduate of the Lila Atchison, I'm going to take that back, of the Lila Atchison Wallace American Playwrights Program at the Juilliard School. Please use the chat to join me in welcoming Donja onto your screens and expressing your joy throughout the program. Let's see here. Welcome, Donja.
Hey everyone. Thank you so much for that, Joey. I am so excited to be here. When the Long Wharf reached out with this opportunity, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And I'm so excited that the day is here for that to be done, which is a conversation that holds space for people living with HIV. And this event is entitled A Fuller Story of HIV. And I'm over the moon that I'll be able to hold space with some amazing artists in this conversation. And so, though we've been told it's no longer a death sentence, so many narratives still focus on people dying of AIDS and not living with HIV. And this event is a way of being able to shift and change that. Us being to show individuals who are not just living or surviving, but thriving with HIV, individuals who are creating narratives that hold space for us. And we're going to kick off, before we jump into the conversation, we're going to kick off with a performance by a brilliant artist, and their work, their play, Neptune, was one of the first times that I ever saw myself as a Black queer person living with HIV on the stage. And so I am so honored to present Timothy DuWhite, and I'll give a little information about Timothy. Timothy DuWhite is a Black queer poet, actor, and activist based out of Brooklyn, New York. His essays and poetry can be found in The Rumpus, The Root, Afropunk, Black Youth Project, The Griot, and elsewhere. DuWhite was named a Black LGBTQ+ playwright you need to know by Time Out NY. He is an alumnus of the Public Theater's Bars program, and he is a current member of the Public Theater's Emerging Writers Group 2020 to 2022 cohort and a 2020-2021 BAM Resident Artist. All that to say, Tim is the shit. So here is Tim. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Donye. And you are also the shit. And yeah, hi everyone. I'm gonna say I have one poem for you all. And actually, I was gonna read one particular thing, but then I just got inspired to read this instead. Um, so basically, about this poem, I wrote it after a poem by a poet by the name of Lauren Whitehead. And she wrote this poem called It Was Already Dangerous. And in the poem, she was talking about how her father, working at a grocery store as now what we call an essential worker, was already dangerous before the pandemic and was just made even more dangerous, or exacerbated rather, because of the pandemic. So after reading that poem, I was thinking to myself, like, what else was already dangerous before the pandemic came? And of course, I thought about HIV and like living with disease was already treacherous, and then the pandemic just like sort of unearthed so many feelings. So that's what this poem is talking about. I mean, it was already dicey, me carrying a body with this sort of blood. There already existed a need for me to clean everything, for me to bring my own utensils to the party, for me to not touch the baby. I mean, there were already misinformation, conspiracy theories. There were already the 80s and the 90s, already a pill questioned for its effectiveness, quite a few doctor's visits, a cough, a fever. I mean, I was already worried about what I could do to someone I loved or didn't love or just met and needed a touch. I mean, there were already a statistic, a cast of mostly blacks dying from it. I mean, there was already Reagan, already a government drunk on ignoring. I mean, I was already fearful for my partner, how he would approach my body so eagerly, how he would approach the world so unabashedly. I mean, there are only so many T cells. Only so much science could do to protect me. I was already just getting over the guilt of the last thing, just getting good at saying HIV with my full mouth wide and in public, and now I am forced to close it again, forced to go inside again, forced to fear what I can do to everyone else with the very thing that has been done to me. And I mean, it's not like I didn't already have enough to write about, right? Thank you all so very much.
Whew. Thank you, Tim. I want us to give these some snaps. You can write snaps in the comment. You can do the clap emoji in the comment. You can thank Tim in the comment. But thank you so much, Tim. And this is why you are such a brilliant writer. And that is exactly why I'm so honored that you kicked us off by just centering us for this conversation. And I want to share a bit about the artist that I'll be in conversation with. And after I share about these amazing artists, you'll be able to see their wonderful faces, and we're going to jump into the conversation. And so the first artist that I am honored to hold this virtual space with is Cece Suazo Harris. Cece is an activist, playwright, and actress. She is a legend in the ballroom community, beginning her career as the youngest member of the iconic House of LaBeija in 1988. She was honored with the 2018 Advocate Magazine Award for her contributions in the ballroom community and performing arts. Go off, Cece. As an actress, she's appeared in numerous off-Broadway productions. As a playwright and activist, she was the first trans woman of color at Wow Cafe Theater, the nation's oldest women in trans collectives. She's one of the founders of Trans Lab. She's also, come on, Cece, she's also the creator of the Black Trans Stories Matter workshop. She's currently a producer of the new Conversation digital series for the girls. Her playwriting residencies include National Queer Theater, The Lark, Write It Out, WP Theater, the Public Theater, and Rattlestick Theater. Our next amazing individual who will be holding virtual space with us for the conversation is Isaac Q. Grivett. Isaac is a multi-hyphenate theater artist who has worked in wardrobe and costumes, set construction, lighting and writing. They've worked on numerous Broadway and off-Broadway productions. As a trans, gay, disabled, chronically ill person, Isaac is passionate about bringing stories about those communities to the stage. Yes, 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 Isaac. And our final individual who will be holding virtual space with us for this conversation is Raúl Ávila Muñoz. As Isaac, I'm sorry, not Isaac. Raúl is an actor, playwright, director, and dramaturg. They are the co-founder and co-producing artistic director of the Euphoria Theater Project, a theater company that highlights LGBTQ plus experience by putting intersectionality at the forefront of everything. All this to say, I'll be in conversation with amazing, amazing artists. And so here are the wonderful artists that I'll be in conversation with. Give it up for them in the chat. Yes, 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 yes. Thank you all so much for being here. When I was asked and approached by the Long War to do something during this block of time, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew exactly who I wanted to do it with. And I am over the moon that you all said yes and that we're here in conversation with each other. So thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. So let's just jump right on in. I have some questions that I want to ask my amazing friends. And you all who are watching right now, if you have questions, you can put questions in the chat. And we will, at the end of the conversation, hold space for a Q&A. But before we get there, I'm going to jump right on in. So with this first question, so there's this misconception, right, that people living with HIV, that we live tragic lives. And we know that is not the case. We know that we live life with intention. We know that we live lives that are full of joy, and we know that we are thriving as well. So with that being said, I want to start us off by rooting us in joy by asking, what does joy look like to each of you? And let's start with Raúl. What does joy look like for you?
Well, I'm so happy to be here. This is so joyful. Joy to me, I think it's the simple things. I enjoy food, music, theater, films, friends, all of them combined. You know, joy is for me is being able to be with my people, which is where I am now. You know, with my community, with the people who I know that honor me and affirm me. Uh, and yeah, joy is also like knowing that I am alive, and knowing that I'm alive gives me more reasons to keep continuing. Uh,
Amen. I love the joy for you also look like food, because food is the source of my joy. So come all the way through. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Cece or Isaac, what does joy look like to y'all?
Joy for me is breathing, living, just hydrating, taking a pause, and living in your most authentic truth, and writing your narrative. So that's what joy looks for me, is writing my narrative, my journey, my story, sharing it. So.
Yeah, I had similar to Raúl. Like, I was thinking about going through Ride It Out and how every day, like, even though we were all living with HIV, and that is the like premise of the program, like we all had other things to bring into every day. We would start off saying like how we were feeling, and if we had something, you know, exciting or fun happening, and getting to hear everyone's stories, which most of the time had nothing to do with HIV, but like knowing that we had that connection, but that we also like got to share everything else going on in our lives, and like being able to just talk about that while, you know, having this sort of thing in the background. And I'm also like currently working on a show where everyone is trans, which is, it's amazing. Like we don't, like we can say things that, you know, we'll all understand, whether it's positive or negative. And just like being able, like I've never worked on a physical show with other trans people, so like just being able to have that community, like that community is like so important to me. And like finding places this past year especially, where I have those spaces has been so amazing.
Absolutely, like community is joy, and I'm so grateful to hear what brings you all joy, and hearing you talk about write it out, Isaac. I know for me that has thus far been one of the greatest joys of my life, is being able to hold space with each of you, as well as everyone else that was a part of, because y'all slayed as the inaugural cohort, right? So being in space with everyone else in the inaugural cohort as well was such a joyful moment, not just in like lockdown, but just in my life, and just thinking of all the voices and all the wonderful pieces that came out of that. I'm really curious, because you all are fantastic artists, brilliant writers with unique voices. What type of stories do you all write about? And what demographics or identities do you write about or for? Are there specific stories that you gravitate towards that you really enjoy writing? I'm just really interested in, like, anyone can take this.
I write stories basically for within the community. I write stories for the girls, by the girls, produced by the girls, directed by the girls. So that's where I think my platform, you know, where I write my narratives. And I'm writing real NIGGA, you know, narratives. Real nigga, you know, shit. So
Talk about it.
you know, with that being said, nothing is hidden underneath the rug. I let that all out the bag. And I think that's also presenting your raw, authentic realness on paper, you know, when I'm writing these narratives. So I'm really big for my Black and brown sisters, and brothers as well, because they are also included too. A majority of the time, they're not really spoken of, and they're not really given that credibility that's well deserved from their community as well, the Black and brown boys. So, and I have a Black son too, cisgendered son. So I write stories from, you know, how's it like to be a young Black man in America and being a target on your back. So.
Thank you for the stories you write, and they're all so important and so necessary. I'm really interested, Raúl and Isaac. What stories do y'all write about that y'all gravitate towards, and like who do you write about and for?
Yeah, I think like Cece was saying, that trans men are very, very underrepresented in stories and in, you know, real life and in studies about anything. There's not a lot of us out there in the media, and that's probably one of the most important things to me is seeing more trans people in general, more non-binary people, more trans men, you know, getting our time and getting, you know, just getting our stories out there, and also disabled people, very underrepresented in the media. So I tend to like to combine those, because you know, even more than each individual identity that doesn't get represented, it's nearly zero when you put those identities together into one person or into one story. So that's what I like to write about.
Oh, I say that I write stories that are like in my heart, or that broke my heart, touched my heart in one way or another. And definitely my writing leans towards like sort of finding the magic in the cracks of life. That's how I like to describe it. And I definitely write for my Latino fellows, who I don't see like a lot of like representation there, especially those whose syntax is complicated like mine, because I write like also like in, and so I think like that, like those really get me. Yeah, I would say for the community. I sometimes I get stuck writing in English and Spanish because I'm like, but I'm like trying to get better, or I just make the mix. But definitely about the community. Definitely trying to put the stories that I haven't seen there, and the stories that I have felt in my heart. So yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Hashtag community. No shade. I should have called this for the community, because the way community keeps coming up is absolutely what I need. Hashtag community. And I loved what you said, Raúl, in terms of like writing about the magic and the cracks of life. Oh, baby, don't be surprised if I use that somewhere. You will get all the credit. You will get all the credit, okay? That was so beautiful. And I want to go back really quickly to something you said, Isaac, in terms of there's never really much intersectionality, right? In terms of stories, in terms of narratives, only one identity, and that's it, right? And it's not nuance around it. So with that, I find myself thinking about theater, and I find myself thinking about the work that Hollywood produces as it relates to marginalized identities. And one is often rooted in trauma down, because that's what people think our lives are, is trauma down. And then two, like I said, there's no intersectionality or nuance. It's like someone can only be Black or disabled, and seldom is it someone who is Black and disabled and trans. We don't see that nuance, right? And so I'm really curious, what stories exist where you've seen that nuance, particularly for people living with HIV? And has there been any work where you've seen your intersections reflected and reflected with care, right? And so what stories have you seen where you've seen yourself reflected, particularly as people live with HIV? And in that reflection, have you seen these stories done with care? And I'm really interested, what are your thoughts around that for the stage and or for the screen? And I would love to hear your thoughts, Isaac, around this.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever like seen anything that I feel like represented me really, especially with HIV. I definitely don't know of any like trans people with HIV stories, except for you know, the stuff that I wrote. So yeah, it's very uncommon. Like, you really, everything that I am thinking of, like, except for the stuff that we did in Write It Out, and the stuff that I've seen of yours, Donye, and Tim's, that like, except for those, I've only really seen like the cis white men stories with HIV, because that's kind of all there is, like, really in the mainstream right now. Yeah, like I honestly like can't even really think of anything that I felt has really represented me.
And I'm tired down of those cis, queer, white, privileged men living with HIV, dying of AIDS stories. Absolutely. And like, I would love to see other intersections, and maybe I've missed something and I hold space for if I haven't seen something. And so I'm just really interested. Cece and Raul, have y'all seen anything where you've seen yourself reflected in the work? I'm really curious.
I've seen Tangerine, and that was all the girl. I'm talking about it, like every cast member that was cast in that film, all actually lived those moments. It was like casting that basically went to like Hollywood, knew where to find particular characters, activity, and it was so real. Like, so I feel like that was one story that I seen myself, and it was just one time out of the thousands of writers and producers that allegedly want to write these stories, but at the end of the day, come on, color plays a big change. So it's unfortunate that's only been the only one film I've seen the Black and brown girls depicted in. All the other stories, can we talk about what was it, Transparent?
Yeah, like there's like,
That's all I gotta say.
yeah, like there's narratives out there where you can tell, right, a very particular lived experience is not at the center, right, or weren't the individuals who are behind the work. Like, even if it's presented as handled with care, you can still feel that there were like missteps. And like, I love this conversation because for me, I think it's like holding space for when are we truly at the center, and in a way where it holds space for the nuance, right? It holds space for like the multiplicity of who we are as a whole human being, right? And I love that you brought that up, Cece, about transparent, because there's so many works out there where it doesn't hold space with that care, right? The care is, I think, one of the most important components. And I'm really interested, is there any stories that you've seen yourself reflected, Raúl, like to any degree where it was handled with care as well?
I think that the only actual portrayal that I saw, it was the first time that I saw, I think it was a year ago when 1 and 2 was produced for the virtual space. There was the space machine. I didn't even see it live. I mean, it was live, but like I was in the theater, and I was like, oh wow, like I saw, like everything was very, and obviously I don't pertain to those specific intersections, but the nuances and the care and the journey that led me through, it was real, it was raw, it was not this kind of paraphernalia of let's show how what AIDS is like, and then this like ethereal thing that comes, like it's just, I think, just so tired of those things. So I think I've never seen myself like I've never seen a Latina a non-binary person, like I don't. It's like going back to what Isaac said, like the same narratives that definitely it's they're just boring at this time, and I think they also misinform people because it's not what it is. Like it's just there's a lot of misinformation with it. Would keep repeating, like reviving these things because it's not what it is, and people still believe other things like from the past. So definitely working towards bringing those narratives.
Hashtag it's boring. It's boring at this time, and it's no shade. I think we lost Isaac, and so hopefully the tech team is working to bring Isaac back because we definitely need them up in this space. And so as that's happening, I like True T. The stories are out there, like because we are here. The stories are out there, right? And so for me, it also feels like a conversation of why aren't individuals who are of the lived experience, who are creating these stories with care, given the opportunity, right? Because what I find myself hearing is, oh, we don't know if these things, they're here. Look at the people in this conversation right now and so many other individuals, right? Hey, Isaac is back. But like, again, the stories are out there. The stories exist. They're being written. And what's being done to give individuals the opportunity to be able to see Cece's work, to be able to see Raúl's work, to be able to see Isaac's work, because you all created and create such beautiful work, right? And I'm still really thinking about community right now and thinking about just like intersections. And I'm finding myself thinking about, as it relates to living with HIV, it's so much stigma, right? That we navigate through. And there's shame that we can navigate through as well, right? It's not everyone's journey, but it's a large part of the collective journey. And so that makes me think about disclosure and how real that is for our community because of shame and stigma being real. And disclosure is also real for the trans community as well for similar reasons. And I find myself thinking about the intersection of Black and brown trans artists living with HIV who may be public with their gender identity, but not public with their status, right? And so having to navigate medication, having to navigate test results and programs alone while still creating art. And so all of this, thinking about disclosure and what the disclosure looks like for folks who live on intersections, I'm really interested in what does it mean to fully live in one's truth? And does one have to be public with their status? Does one have to disclose to live in one's truth, right? And I think that's a really complicated and nuanced question. But when I think about living in truth, I'm really curious of what are your thoughts around it? Does one have to disclose their status to live in truth? And then also, what does that look like for our trans community who may live in truth publicly with one aspect of themselves, but not in another? And how do we hold space for that? And I know that's a really big question, but I'm really interested in how can we hold the most space for folks living in their truth and do it with, as we talked about, care, right? And I'm really curious of your thoughts around that, Cece.
Well, for a long time, I wasn't living in truth, period, with just my whole just being of who I am. And it was like, damn, you get all these opportunities, but you constantly have to wear a mask every day. It's like putting on a facial mask and you have to scrub it off once it fully sets in. And then when it fully sets in, it's like, okay, it didn't feel right when it was laying on my face, when it was molding. So it was just, for me, it was like, you gotta put on this new mask today and keep it pushing. But initially, at the end of the day, I had to say, are you really happy? Are you really happy with putting on that mask? You're really not happy. You hate putting on that mask. You hate having to tell one lie after another lie after another lie. So what are you really getting out of it? People really don't respect you more when you're not really living to your fullest, but living truthfully. And I wanted to be more respected. I wanted to be taken seriously, but I had to challenge myself first by unmasking my truth. So that's what.
Thank you.
Um,
Yeah, Cece, thank you so much for sharing that, because, like I said, it is incredibly like nuanced, and then also um, everyone's journey is different, right? Like everyone's journey is their journey, and then also the very truth of the matter is, when we talk about living in truth, some folks don't publicly disclose because of survival, right? I'm safer if I don't say this thing, right? No shade. And so just wanting to hold space for the like nuance of it all, and really appreciative of you sharing your journey and you being in a space of walking as fully as possible in your truth, and knowing that it was a process for you to get to where you are, right? And that process, whatever it was, got you to be where you are right now. So I thank you for sharing that, and also acknowledging and holding space for like everyone's journey is different. How do we navigate that with care? And I'm really interested and curious, Isaac, Raúl, like what are your thoughts around disclosure and living in truth? And when we think about individuals who are on intersections, may exist fully and openly in one truth, but not in another.
I think for me, I felt like I had to be out as trans, um, essentially from the beginning, because I came out my senior year of high school. There was no like there was no space for me to not to do that and not be like known by everyone, because the people that I grew up with, and they all knew who I was. And once I started like taking testosterone and changed my name and stuff, it's like you can't hide that. And then it just sort of like morphed into being out for the rest of my life. And with HIV, it was different for me because in my head at the time, it wasn't important for, like, it wasn't necessary for me to be out to people that I knew. There was no reason that anyone needed to know unless I was having sex with them. Um, and it was very much a medical condition for me at the beginning, and it turned into an identity that I felt was important, um, to be represented, to especially like being a trans man, a thing that I have read studies on like trans healthcare and in in HIV healthcare, and they're really like, you see this and this and this and this, and we don't have any data on trans men, and like at that intersection there is just nothing. And so it turned into me feeling like I needed to be a sort of representative of that community, um, and be out and have people know, like, it happens to us too. representation exists, even if you don't, even if it's not, common. And it's part of the reason that I got HIV in the first place was because people don't think that women and people with vaginas are at risk, or as at risk. And so like having that experience and seeing like, oh, representation could actually like change people's lives and could help get us better healthcare, better reception. That's when it sort of turned for me, saying like, oh, this is more than just a medical condition. This is more than just something that I can pass on to someone else. It is, it could mean survival for someone else if I am out.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. And also in terms of talking about representation and feeling as if there is a lack of representation for your lived experience, for your intersection. So you now have to be vocal, right? And I'm sure other things came into this, like decision of disclosing. And it just, it has me hot. It has me hot because there's a lack of representation. So you feel like you have to like pick up that baton because we aren't seeing your lived experience, right? And there's no shade. Representation is not liberation. Representation is a path to get us to liberation, right? But what we need is the representation, right? Like, why do we not see these stories reflected on stage and on screen? Why does it only look a very specific way, right? And I would imagine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Isaac, if there were a plethora of stories of trans folks, trans women, trans men, non-binary folks living with HIV on stage and on screen, maybe you would be like, oh, I actually don't have to be this spokesperson because I'm seeing things plastered everywhere, which is good, right? And why do we have to do the extra work? Because motherfuckers are being lazy. Because that's what it boils down to, right? So thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for existing in the fullness of yourself, as well as you talked about, Cece. And I'm really interested, Raúl, do you have any thoughts around this?
Yeah, it's I think it's the question, to in my most recent one person show, the character asks themselves to disclose or not to disclose. That is the question. And I think, like it's been said, it's a journey. And for me, when I was diagnosed, I knew that I had to disclose. Like I had to disclose, as though it was that's where I think it came the stigma, because I was surrounded, the whole medical system that I was surrounded, it was very, very, very close-minded. I felt trapped. I didn't feel welcome there. So like, oh, I did something very wrong. I'm just in the wrong. So I should just, and the first thing that they would ask me like, who you're gonna tell? I'm like, my best friend, like I was like, just like, I don't know. But it's like kind of like this, the whole stigma society like pushes you to say it. And I think when it comes to terms with the healthcare system, and then them not understanding very well how people living with HIV are thriving now, and and all the things that we know now, and also they not understanding gender variance. I think it's so problematic also, because then it doesn't feel welcome to go to the doctor. It doesn't feel nourishing. It doesn't feel, because I face so many walls within those spaces, and I'm like, why do I have to go through all this? Yeah, like things with, like, let's say like medication or stuff, like people like, oh, you don't have a prescription for this. I'm like, well, my prescription is for life, honey. Like the pharmacist, I'm like, what part of this medication, like, you don't, like, So I think there's like a lot of misinformation even within the healthcare system, that they're just like pushing aside all the people who are not cis, you know, and all the people who, like, it's just very much like just centering around a specific um, identity, and I think it's harmful. Been so harmful, and it needs to stop.
Baby, you are on fire. Fire and desire. Quite, because no, like that's what it gives. Like, not only are we talking about not seeing ourselves like reflected on the stage and on screen, and how representation is important, right? And how that ties into disclosure. So does like the healthcare system, no shade. Like, you talking about your journey with the healthcare system. I hate having to go for my checkups and getting blood work done, right? Like, it is literal hell for me, right? As a person living with HIV, why do I feel so much tension and like adversity going to a place that's supposed to help me, right? And that also ties into disclosure as well. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, right? And I think it's so important to also have that conversation as well. And I'm really interested, and I want to remind those who are watching, if you have any questions, please put them in the comment, because we're almost at that moment where we are Q&A-ing it up. But I have one more question that I would love to ask before we throw it to the audience, and it's connected to what you just talked about so beautifully and passionately, Raúl, which is like, there are many online and real life spaces that supports a group of people and artists living with HIV, but at least from my experience, they're often rooted in information and preachy sessions of how to live with HIV, of this is what you need to do. Let me give you some condoms and lubes if you are coming to this session. And it's really not rooted in listening to people living with HIV, right? Like, we don't have a space to just be. So I'm curious, as individuals living with HIV, how do you cultivate meaningful community, personally or artistically, right? Like, how do you cultivate a community where you get to be the fullest version of yourself, where you get to hold space for all of your lived experiences as full and whole as possible? What does that look like for y'all? Y'all can do rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Anybody can jump right on in. And I'll jump in. For me, it looks like this. This actually is community for me. Us being able to hold space and I had this conversation, write it out. What we did together at the end of last year, that was for me by far better than any like online or real life support group, because not only was it rooted in our lived experience of living with HIV, but it was also rooted in something that we all love, which is art, right? Which is creating stories. So we got to do these two things. And I talked about this before to folks, and I'll share it again. One of the defining moments for me when I was like, oh, Right Out is actually it, was at the top of one session, how we always shared our number and how we're feeling. I remember I shared right before jumping into our session, I had blood work done. And collectively, the entire group went, y'all all got it. I didn't have to say what that meant, why I'm in this space. Y'all all got it. And that for me was divine community and divine healing in that moment, right? And so that's how I cultivate community, is just being honest and being in spaces that hold space for multiple lived experiences of mine. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think I've never been like super into the sort of like support group type thing. It always felt like it sort of turns into everyone just like crying about like the worst parts of whatever you're there for. And I like that is totally like great for some people. It's just not not something that interests me at all. Um, so yeah, like having that sort of that other purpose, like, you know, being there to write, or, you know, like my running club is an LGBT running club. We're not constantly like talking about like the horrible things about being gay. Like we go there to run and think about whatever interests us, and how, you know, like just being able to be around other LGBT people or other people with HIV, or, you know, whatever it's for, is like that's what I like, is just knowing that it's there, that those people can help me through tough times, that those people are interested in hearing about the good times, and that we can talk about the other things that we're interested in. And it doesn't have to be completely about just whatever the support group is. So like, yeah, like write it out. And like my friend who has parties for HIV, and we just go and we have dinner and we have fun, and yeah, that's the sort of things that I enjoy. Um, and where I feel like I am the most at home, like with my community.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Anybody else? Raul, Cece, are there specific ways in which you cultivate community, and what does that look like for you?
Well, I feel very much now in, like you said, Donja, in community now. I have a beautiful family curated by you. And my family, my write it out family, who I love dearly. And like this thing of when you just mentioned this thing about things like getting it, that when you have your blood work done. When I talk with my when I said those things with my friends who are not HIV positive, people will just evade the thing, like oh, let's look at the clouds, like it's just like because they don't know how to, like they don't know if I want them to be. Oh, I'm so, like I don't, obviously not. I'm just like sharing, oh, I have my blood work. But it's definitely that thing. And there's this group. It's an Instagram group. Well, it's an Instagram account. It's a Spanish speaking account that it's called Hablemos de HIV, which is let's talk about HIV. And I found them very, very early in my diagnosis. And I was like, wow, and so many posts, many anonymous because of stigma, of people sharing their journeys with their diagnosis or whatever journey, what it's about. It's people living with HIV. And then last year, they started to have online sessions just to chat about literally whatever. Like we would chat about whatever, the cat. And then, but then we were all in communion, and that group still the online sessions still are not anymore happening because now people are gonna are like meeting in person, and they are based in Argentina actually. So clearly I'm not there. So but we have a group message over Instagram, and then many times people just type or whatever. Like if I have something, I just type like a little video, and then I'm like, oh, people, this thing is happening to me, and then we just chat and whatever. And I know exactly that thing, like they get me this thing of understanding and a lot of support and a lot of but it's not all about one thing, it's about all our things. But it makes me definitely feel that thing that you said, like that thing of community. So yeah, I love community.
Oh, absolutely. Hashtag I love community. Anything from you, Cece, before we turn it over to the audience?
I think for me, it was community. I think being part of Write Out, at first, the first, I'm going to say, few weeks were, I was a mess. It was difficult for me because I'd never been in such a space with other people that were just like me, everyday people. Um, at first, I think I felt like you have a few strikes against you. But I think after weeks passed by, nobody judged me. Nobody judged me, looked at me differently. Um, and I said, well, this is the community I belong in. You know, um, not only a community, but it's a family. You know, being led by a dynamic man such as yourself, Donja. And it, yeah, it's about community and establishing those relationships, because I feel like we all have personal relationships with each other. And I can call on most of anyone that is attached at any given time. So I'm really thankful for the community you've created for us, Donja, and bringing us along. So I'm forever grateful for that.
Amen to community, and I'm forever grateful for each and every single one of y'all. Truly, truly, truly. And I think about, write it out, I think about us every day. And I think about how we, as people living with HIV, can be the fullest version of ourselves and really express ourselves personally and artistically as much as possible. I got word that we are at our last 13 minutes and there aren't any questions from the audience, which for me gives very much, we said all was that was supposed to be said. We slayed how we were supposed to slay, so there are no questions from the audience. Thank you to everyone who watched. I hope that you got something out of it. And before we go, before I turn it back over to Long Wharf, I have one more question. And for me, it's about like what's next, right? Like what do we want as it relates to representation? And so as we think about a need for fuller and more diverse stories about and spaces for people living with HIV, what do each of you want to say to those people who program theater and or those individuals who produce for TV and film about our narratives? What do you want to say to, again, theater producers and to film and TV producers about our narratives, about our stories? What would be that last thing we would want them to hear as it relates to conversations and narratives about our lived experience? And anybody can jump in.
Call me. I'm available. I'm available to tear it down and build it, not rebuild, but build it. So you can get the narrative correct. It's way too much foolishness I read on a day-to-day basis. It's too much garbage I see, and I'm just simply shaking my head. And I'm like, but wait a minute. How are you researching? Research. Don't say, oh, I couldn't find nobody, or I didn't know they were out there. Research. Do your homework. We've all done homework one way or another to get to the positions we're currently in. So do that homework. And then call one of us. Give us the coin, call one of us. Stop giving someone like Ryan Murphy and the Next White Man these opportunities to write these narratives, because you wrote it all wrong.
She said, shots fired. Thank you, Cece. Thank you. Anybody else, what would you want to say to theater producers, to Hollywood producers about our narratives, about our lived experience?
I think they tend to see underrepresented groups or underrepresented stories as like taking a chance, and that they don't want to take a chance on something that they don't know will be well received. But I think that the more authentic the story, the casting, all of that, the more it will actually resonate with people, the more education can come from, the more obviously representation. And it, like for me, even the stories that I don't relate to as much, with identities I don't hold myself, you can tell, you can still tell when they are written and produced and everything by people who do represent those identities, and that I think even if you're uh, you know presenting people who are not already in the mainstream, um, that work will, if it's good, if the work is good, that people will enjoy it and people will want to see it. That it's not, we're past the point of saying we only need this type of person on screen.
Yeah, I'd like to ditto to everything that was said before. I'd like to ask them to tell them to move forward. Like to embrace, um, yeah, to embrace like the new and get rid of the old, like the things that keep being doing over and over again. I would call them to not only like did it to what Isaac just said, like to not only diversify and decolonize their seasons, but also their teams, because that's where there's lack of representation everywhere. Um, and this really needs to change, and I think it's so important that people are aware that stories are told in many ways with their teams, um, and that's how they're gonna have well-rounded, nuanced, and stories that everybody's gonna reflect because they come from a very deep personal place that they become universal, and I think that's what we all want. So do your homework and, like Cece said, call us. We have so many things to bring to the table.
Yes, yes, and more. Yes, everything that was said, right? Like, call us, do your homework before you call us, and after you call us, still do your homework about our lived experiences, right? Like, it doesn't stop with just calling us, it still is doing your homework about these lived experiences. It's about, as you said, Isaac, giving individuals opportunities, right? Like, I reject this idea of people are taking a risk. um, it is literally about giving opportunity, right? Like, there is no risk in my life, right? My life is very much full and abundant, and you aren't taking a risk. It is just an opportunity being given, right? And I think that needs to be very clearly articulated and understood. And also, I would say, after the opportunity is given, after we're called, after folks are doing their homework, and while folks are doing their homework, another important element that I've been learning time and time again is y'all need to market our shit, because we could create the best possible work, right? And it's not even a flame out there. People will not even know that the work exists, right? So on top of that, another thing is these theater producers and these Hollywood producers need to also market our work, right? So that our work can be out there so people can know that it's out there in a way that these individuals get a recoup, right? They get their money back. So it's not, oh, well, we tried. It didn't do any numbers because y'all didn't put it out there. Y'all didn't let people know that it was existing. So for me, that would be one of the biggest things on top of everything that was said, is making sure that the work is marketed, and is marketed with care, is marketed with intention, and we are in the conversation around what that marketing looks like for our lived experience. I thank each and every single one of you, Cece, Raúl, Isaac. thank you so very much for being in this conversation, for holding space, for saying what was supposed to be said. I am full from this conversation of a fuller story of HIV. Thank you tremendously. And I would love to turn it back over to the Long Wharf. I would love to turn it back over to Joey. And thank you to the audience as well. And I'll say peace.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. Again, thank you to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for their support of the lab. Thank you to Donja. Thank you to Timothy. Thank you, Cece. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you, Raúl, for you all being here and for your brilliance and for sharing your time with us and your artistry. And yeah, that's pretty much it for today. The lab will be taking a break for the month of August, so we will be back in September, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.